Megan's answer's got a lot going for it as well. Again, very promising. Again, it starts off by very strongly talking about a face value. Agrees with this interpretation. We've got a grammatical error there to a large extent. We're actually putting our cards on the table and saying how far we agree with it. As she said, it's a large extent. I'm now expecting her to prove ways in which it backs it up, which she does. We've got gotcha, QE2, and she explains nice and precise this section, by the way. Commercial boat, showing us that the unity throughout the British industrial sector. That's great. And we've got our lads, sink gunboat and whole cruiser. Our lads again explaining that, and then we have this however bit, because of course she says further up here that it's a large extent. So again, we expect all this stuff that we've got here, all this section, because she's saying ways in which it supports it. But then we wait for this however, because she says she's not saying it completely supports it. So we get this however little bit down here. And if we look beyond face value, and now we get the challenge. Okay, source 6 is based on, which is based on the Sun, pro-conservative newspaper at the time. Yeah, there we go. There's a bit of a grammatical error there as well, actually. Okay, which could lose some looking at. Yeah, it talks about they would support the Conservative Party. This is a little bit naive, and perhaps as the course goes on, the knowledge improves, that we'll get a little bit more out of that. Would only show them in a positive way. It's naive, but it's true. It's not wrong. And at this stage of the course, it's exactly right. It's building into a very nice answer. Then we got the Union boycotts war bit. Suggests not everyone was patriotic, and we could then expand on that and bring in more contextual knowledge and talk about things like how the Labour Party were against it, and how divided Britain was, and the fact there was a miners' strike after it. We could do all that sort of stuff, but it peters out. Therefore, a more precise interpretation would be, and we don't have it. Now that would be a real problem in the exam. What Megan needs to do is to say what exactly is problematic, and why it's problematic, and then rewrite it. So I think a pretty obvious 2 stars and a wish. Very, very promising answer in terms of it being a star. It does everything. It does face value. It does beyond face value. It just peters out a bit towards the end, but very, very promising. And nice and precise in places. And again, I think that the wish should be pretty obvious, because the wish is not to peter out in the way that it does, and to build an answer which would seem to be building quite nicely, but then to talk about what is lacking in the source, what is problematic, and why. So that would make this a very strong answer. Not a bad first effort at all. And of course, there is a further wish on this, which is to look back at the spelling and grammatical errors and to correct those and show me so that they're not repeated, and we can start to sort of deal with that. Now, Alex has done a really good effort here, and what I like about it is the precision of the answer. It peters out a little bit towards the end though, but we have the face value bit, okay, we have the patriotism, and it's backed up by knowledge, it's evidenced, our boys, gotcha, and it shows patriotism and jingoism. Then we go on to see that it has however, alright, so we have the other side here. It also shows that some people are not patriotic about the war. That sounds a little bit naive, but it's backed up. Union boycotts war. If we look beyond face value, they start to get to grips with how divided British society was at the time. Many people were against the Falklands. Now, this many people bit you see I've circled, because my answer was, well, my question at the time was, well, who do you mean? But that's nice and precise. They say who they are. Trade unions. I can't quite read that word. Oh yeah, something stroke coal workers. Especially unpatriotic. Now that's quite a judgmental thing. I'd be very careful about that, okay? You're better off being more precise and saying did not necessarily buy into this. Of course, some coal miners were actually reservists or were in the army and did fight, so you've got to be quite careful with that. And also, Margaret Thatcher was trying to close down coal mines. Is a little simplistic, although it would be good to bring in the fact that there was a miners' strike from 1984. But you're right to talk about how split the country was. These people did not support the war. I think they probably did, and the point that's made here is that, and we then go on to talk about the pro-conservative newspaper, and why that nice word there, problematic. Polemic, sorry, polemic, yeah. Yeah. So, but yeah, these people did not support the war. It becomes interesting on the next slide because on this slide, where do we go? The bits I was looking for here. I can't read that word, by the way, which is a bit problematic again for me. A large majority of the public, as shown by Margaret Thatcher, gone from being nicely evidenced, nice and precise. This is exactly what I mean. Now, the bit that's problematic for me is then it's suddenly, you see how nicely this is being built up, that at face value it looks like this, however, then it's not quite like it, it's all nicely evidenced, and then suddenly it just goes into this, overall, I think, this, and therefore I think a more accurate interpretation is that could be, that's the bit that's key for me. It's only a short period of the 20th century. It's a snapshot. It's just like the Boer Wall at a Mafeking night. It's a snapshot of that time. And I think where you say these people didn't support the war because she's closing down coal mines, I think they actually probably did, but they probably did just for that short amount of time. I would have made that more of that, and that would have been the bit that's problematic for me about that interpretation. Sometimes you might have gone for short in the short term or something like that for a short period to make it more precise. So the two stars on this one, well, the first star is that obviously that this is lovely, well argued, well structured. It's building an argument. It's beginning to build an argument anyway. And how precise it is the second one. It's just beautifully precise, and everything is being backed up very nicely. And at this stage of the course, we've not even looked at the knowledge in any great depth. That's very impressive. The wish would be to make it less abrupt at the end here. Overall, it just suddenly dives into a change. It's been building, building, building. It could be much more subtly built into here, so we can see exactly why it's being changed. But a strong answer and a very impressive first attempt. Right, Jessica has a real good go at this and just lets herself down a little bit at the end, but a very promising first piece of work. I love this to a large extent, so making a judgment on the interpretation straight away, and then backing it up, of course, by talking about words like, nice quotes out of it, like gotcha and our lads, and then talking about, expanding upon that. A bit of a grammatical error there. But then we have this however section here. We have the Union boycotts the war. Okay, bit of naivety here because this could be a real opportunity to bring in more knowledge about who exactly were against it. The Daily Mirror, for example, the Labour Party. But I guess at this stage of the course that knowledge isn't necessarily there, but later in the course it will be. But I like this. Therefore, the source at face value mostly agrees with the interpretation, but not completely. Backing up what was said earlier about a large extent. Nice and precise. It's building an argument to a large extent, proving, however, and then reiterating it there. Then we go beyond face value, and a bit of knowledge brought in, largely a popular war, jingoism, national pride. So it's typical of the time. Now I start to feel that she's starting to take the corners a little bit fast, because I'm starting to think, what's the relevance to this? She does come back in though, reflects the patriotism shown, that builds the argument. Makes a good point here, okay, that's fine. But it says the source can only show British attitudes toward the Falklands conflict is problematic because it doesn't tell us that much about opposition. Now that's quite good. Now I'm waiting for, therefore, this bit is problematic and doesn't work, and therefore the interpretation needs to be amended, and this is a better one. We just have this means the source is limited in terms of how much information it gives us the public support, and she's really answering question B there, rather than question A. The question was, how far do the sources support the interpretation? And she's had a fantastic start to it, and if it doesn't, can you amend it? Well, she hasn't amended it at the end. So the big start for this is amend the interpretation. That it's been really well argued, and now at the end, make sure that you amend it. Say what's problematic and amend it. I'm sorry, that's not a star, is it? That would be a wish. That's the big wish for this. Okay, amend your interpretation. But the stars, well, without doubt, it's particularly precisely written at the beginning. And an argument is being really well built there, and yes, there's knowledge lacking in places, but it's pretty impressive, and I think the how well crafted and well structured the answer is until the end is really good, and it's also very precisely backed up with points and knowledge. So those two things to really stick with, but of course the thing to work on here is that last section about amending that interpretation. As I said, the corner just gets taken a little bit fast there at the end. Now Molly is again another really promising answer, but still some basic errors which at this stage of the course you'd expect to work upon. A good start. The source at face value is full of support. That could be more precise. Largely, completely, a little, not at all, something like that used. Instead, a few examples. We've got gotcha. I like this, the idea that it's on a front page and she expands on that. That's nice. And I love this idea about the slang words as well, which is quite interesting. Our lads again there. Then talks about the Sun being a conservative supporter at this time, a subjective view. Okay, right, that's all great. Very, very nice. So she's building up the argument at the beginning here, and then further down here she's contradicting the argument, which is fantastic as well. This I also know from my contextual knowledge that can just be straight into it. You can just say, however, attitudes to war had clearly, and just go straight on with that. Now here it starts to spin out of control a little bit. It's been quite tightly controlled up till then. This limits the usefulness. When I know it is talking about when looking at whether the British people responded, but that's not the question whether it's useful. The question is how far does it back it up? You want to be talking about extent, largely, a little, not at all, words like that. Completely, not usefulness. That's question B. Heavily subjective as a concept. Now this bit all starts to repeat itself, and then again a very abrupt ending here. Some problems with it. I mean, the question isn't usefulness and problems. That's question B. I would amend the interpretation. Why? What's problematic? This bit at the end is a bit of a letdown for what was a very promising start to the answer. So 2 stars and a wish. Well, star number 1 would be the beginning. It's very strong. It's following it nicely. It does face value. It does, and it goes beyond it. It does more than that. It actually builds an argument. The other star that I'd give would be to say about the good use of knowledge, and also how everything's evidenced quite precisely at the beginning. And I think it's pretty obvious what the wish would be, and that's to tighten at the end an awful lot. It really starts to spin out of control at the end, and stops answering the question, starts to drift into question B. The wish has to be more precise, and to stay focused on the question, to explain why the interpretation is lacking, and then to suggest a new one that's more appropriate. Well, Gareth's answer's short and sweet, really, and there's no faffing about on it. All the way through it, it's about proving the statement, which I really like. So it starts off at face value, completely. That's always really good, because he's focused on proving or disproving the interpretation, which is at the top here, of course. Gotcha. Celebratory, patriotic manner. This is nicely written, this sentence. And I love the way, look, a revival of jingoism seen before 1916 just slipped into the sentence there. There's an awful lot going on in that sentence. It's worth looking at that again, and the contextual knowledge being brought in there as well. Our lads, our, and they are all, that idea of that. Fairly typical at the time. It was popular, the British public responded patriotically. Fine, great, no knowledge being used there. Then, of course, we have, which we want, the however bit, put on the other side, looking deeper than face value. And he widens the period, which is quite nice. The patriotism was short-lived. Indeed, it was. Britain was very split before this war, and Thatcher was the most unpopular Prime Minister since polls began before the war, and yet she went on to win the election in 1983. Widen the period further, and she's hugely unpopular. We get the miners' strike in 1984. There's a capital letter thing here, so it's the Cold War's a title, capital C, capital W. This is a lovely point. If you widen the period, the patriotism was short-lived. It's a really, really good point. But the link is made with the Cold War going on, not with the problems in Britain about the miners' strike and things like that. So I think that bit's a little naive, which we expect at this part of the course. But I hope you can see how well crafted it is at face value. However, if we widen the period, we see a different view. Looking at the provenance of the source, the Sun's a conservative newspaper. Other papers would have painted a different picture of events. Other papers. The Daily Mirror, you could be more precise and name that. And then just very abruptly, a more accurate rewording would be, we just need a little bit in there to talk about why it needs to be changed, what's problematic about it. So if I was going to look at this one and go for 2 stars and a wish, well, my first star would be very well crafted at the beginning in particular, and nicely put together, nicely woven knowledge just thrown in here and there, but it supports things really precisely and really well. The other star would be how well it's crafted and how well it's backed up by quotes and evidence. My wish, I think again is quite self-evident really. The wish for me would be this little bit here at the end. It just comes on a bit too abruptly. It's been building all the way through into a very nice argument, and at the end it suddenly gets thrown. It just suddenly just dives in. It looks like you're following a formula, and you just stick in the rewritten one at the end because you know you have to. It would be nice to say, therefore, this part of the interpretation is problematic because, and it needs to be amended to, and that would massively improve your answer. Alongside, of course, your knowledge improving as the course comes along. As the knowledge improves, this answer will also get stronger. And of course, the other wish here would be, if we're going to look at wishes, would be to look at the capital letters for any titles, any proper nouns like Cold War.